The best things about Lewes is that it's an ancient market town. There's a real sense of community and history here. It's a lovely place to live.
The Harveys, bonfire, the independent shops, and the completely barking people.
If Lewes was a type of car, it would definitely be a Citroen 2CV running on mung bean juice.
Mark Steele's in town.
Good evening and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town. This week I'm in Lewes, in the All Saints Arts Centre, which is a church indeed in Lewes, in the South Downs in Sussex. And this is a town that is most famous for its enormous bonfires and huge processions that take place every Guy Fawkes night, which is, there's something brilliant about that straight away that says something about the town. I think in other towns people say, oh, we're proud because we make the finest mustard in the whole of East Anglia. Or, you know, our town has the highest church spire in the whole of Surrey. But here you go, we burn things. So I'm a little bit anxious about this tonight, because it's not just your fondness for bonfires, Lewis, that makes me a little bit wary. There's a brilliant stroppiness that I've discovered, I think, about Lewes, that I suspect most Lewes people have already discovered. There's this Sussex saying, we won't be druv. The other thing that's slightly awkward about any of these shows is trying to get the accent right. I was in Suffolk a little while ago, and I had a little bit of a listen to it, and I thought, I'm miles out with what I thought it was, because how a Suffolk accent actually goes now is basically when we bought it was just a barn. I think you've got a similar thing to that here, I think, with all these people coming down from London, and they're called DFLs, is that right? So does everybody know that phrase? No, I've been misinformed. DFLs down from London. I can imagine there must be all these sort of people going, oh, God, I mean, it's absolutely marvellous. We moved down here, and if Nigel wants to go to the office, it's only 34 seconds to get to London Victoria, and it's a wonderful place to bring up the kids, because the air is absolutely wonderfully fresh, and 90% of the population have got a PhD in explosives. It's marvellous. So, I can imagine it must be annoying if you were brought up here, sort of hearing all these people in Bill's, the organic grocers. I thought that's probably where the DFLs go. I can imagine them sitting in there going, oh, the fruit is just absolutely amazing. Wonderful. I mean, the apples are £9 each, but they'd all be naturally picked by crows. It's wonderful. So, now, personally, I have no preference between people from big towns, little towns, the country, whatever, but the ones that are infuriating are the people who have moved from a big city to the countryside, and then they go on and on and on about it, and then you meet them and you're still living in the city, and they'll go, oh, I just don't know how you can stick it down there in all that rat race. I mean, while you're stuck on the underground in a crush, Petunia and I are out identifying elderberries and stroking herons. I just don't know how you can do it. And if we want fresh meat, then we don't need to go to the supermarket. We just get Farmer Micklethwaite to come straight round and he strangles a calf in the living room. It's wonderful. So I'm slightly wary that maybe this is why you're all here. You're thinking, all right, Mark, he's coming down from London. We'll go down there just to check out he doesn't put an offer on the theatre halfway through. So what I want to find out, so how many people here then are proper Lewesians? Is it? Lewesians. Oh, that's... Oh, blimey, that's not many. It's about 8. Is everyone else from London? Is this a waste? Could we have done this in Lewisham? Well, I never realised this until very recently, really. I was looking stuff up for this show. But the first time that a large crowd came down from London to cause a fuss in Lewes, it turns out was in 1264, the Battle of Lewes. This was following the signing of the Magna Carta, where the barons insisted the king should have to consult at least a few nobles before taking the key decisions. It's sort of establishing a principle that if, for example, a country was to be sent to war, then at least the country's leader has to go through the trouble of making up a pack of lies before getting people to agree to it, at least. But then the king tried to go back on it. So King Henry III, it seems, tried to reverse some of these principles. And then after a few disastrous wars that he had, he insisted that every baron provided him with knights for his army or paid a tax to get out of it. And so some of the nobles proposed a system of government in which in each area the laws would be made up by various members of the gentry that hadn't necessarily been appointed by the king. One noble in particular, Baron de Montfort. And Simon de Montfort formed an army, demanded that the king back down, and then went on to Lewes Lewes, which seemed to be the ideal place for it all to kick off, they decided, in 1264. And then hundreds of the king's men ended up drowning in the river at the end of the fight. There was a street fighting all around here, probably right here, where we are now. First of all, I find it's amazing that this isn't better known. This was a civil war around the issue of whether or not a monarch has a divine right to rule on his own. The king was captured and locked up, and hardly anybody knows about it. Now, one of the reasons why this stuff isn't really known about is that the people that tell these stories make it so incredibly dull. I was reading this one book about the Battle of Lewes, and there was 5 pages arguing about whether the battle was in this field or in the next field. Because after the Battle of Lewes, the king's army got his people together and they had another battle at Evesham where Simon de Montfort was killed and the king got his power back. And with that one, this particular book, they argue about the route that the royal armies took. It was outrageous. At one point he says, I accept Carpenter's theory that the royalist army marched along the line of the current B4084. That's so male, isn't it? I didn't like maybe when the armies met up, all the commanders would sort of get together before the battle and go, oh, right, so you came up the B4084 to Littleworth, cut through Drake's Broughton, followed the road round to Evesham city centre. But what are you going to do next time? Take the bypass at Bestford Bridge. That way you cut out the bottleneck at Penshaw. That's assuming I don't dagger out your liver later on this afternoon. I was thinking maybe during the Battle of Lewes there was a traffic report on BBC Southern Counties Radio. Well, a bit of a battle going on at the moment up the A26, causing quite a tailback at the moment, right up to Stoneham. To make matters worse, a royal army has shed its load just north of the river. So, King Tune, we'll be letting you know just as soon as that clears up. But here's the thing, there is, because you see some sort of signs around Lewes at the moment saying about the Battle of Lewes, and I thought, oh, they like their history, but it's a new Battle of Lewes, I gather. What's that about then?
Housing.
Housing. There's just too much of it.
Too much of it blocking out posh views.
Do I detect a hint of controversy? Oh, would this be the first BBC radio show to end up in a pitched battle? All right. Oh, well, that's interesting then. So it's... So part of the worry is there's a floodplain here, though, isn't there? Am I right about that? You know, I don't know. I mean, it's like when the big floods happen across Britain. You sort of feel sorry for people. And then the way the news goes on about it, everyday helicopters. Once again, we see the apocalyptic vision of the marauding water that has quite literally destroyed the lives. And there was people going, maybe we should have our own Live Aid. And I thought, oh, come on, don't go over the top. I don't suppose if you were from Mozambique and you were watching this, you'd be sending off a cheque with a letter, would you? Going, Dear Tewkesbury, last year 7 of my family were buried alive in a mudslide, but when I saw that you had some of your CDs ruined, it put my trifles into perspective. Now, here's the thing, I was in Tewkesbury, right, a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh, I'll do that line, they'll like that. And I misjudged it, to be honest. Who are the famous people in history from Lewes? Everyone has heard of Tom Paine, haven't they? Yes. The thing that I find is interesting about Lewis's connection with Tom Paine is that there's something about how he fits into the place, in that he was just about possibly the stroppiest Englishman of all time, and somehow fits into the sort of stroppy motif, if you like, of the town. Tom Paine was a corset maker, born in 1737 in Norfolk, but ended up as one of the leaders of the American War of Independence, one of the leaders of the French Revolution, and brought Britain closer to revolution than anybody else really over the last 200 years. Paine moved to Lewes, which it seems is where he learned his stroppiness. And he came here because he was offered a job as a customs officer, and he joined a thing called the Headstrong Club, which met in the White Hart, which is still a hotel there on the High Street. And every week, the debater, judged to be the best debater of the week, would win the Headstrong Club trophy to take home for the week, which, of course, was always Tom Paine. That is just about, historically, the most unlucky you could be to be in a debating society having a competition every week and one of the other debaters is Tom Paine. Almost like at some point in history there was a weekly wine-making society, and then every week the judges went, well, once again the prize goes to Jesus. Paine said, the brilliant thing Tom Paine said while he was here, of the women in Lewes, he said, every one of them falls victim to my charms and good looks. He was the Russell Brand of Lewes. Now, he also seemed to write his first ever pamphlet here, which was on why customs officers should have their salaries increased. And then he finally got the sack for taking days off up in London, where he went to meet the American radical Benjamin Franklin, who suggested that he went to America. And he arrived just before the War of Independence, and he wrote this book called Common Sense, which became the best-selling book in America ever up to that point, and inspired the whole business of ideas for an independent republic. The book became so popular that it inspired thousands of people to join the armies of independence, and inspired George Washington to become a supporter of independence. Paine fell out with Washington over various issues, slavery, arms dealing, the usual things, and he came back to Britain broke, and then wrote Rights of Man, advocating a democratic republic, and it was the best-selling book in Britain ever, and he was hounded out of the country as a result of this, and went to France, where the revolution was going on, and he joined the French revolutionary government, and then he did something which is so magnificently English and stroppy, and you must be very proud of this, Lewes. As a member of the French revolutionary government, he refused to learn a word of French. The writing and debating techniques that he clearly learnt to a large extent here in Lewes made such an impact that when Barack Obama did his inauguration speech, he ended it with these words, with hope and virtue, let us brave once more the icy currents and endure what storms may come. Let it be said that we carried forward that gift of freedom and carried it forward for future generations, which comes from a book called The Crisis, written by Tom Paine. But if that's the best end of it, there's other things that have reached national prominence. Alex, who produces a brilliant magazine called Viva Lewes, in one issue, Viva Lewes says, we're looking back at some of the more gruesome characters tried in Lewes Assizes, including John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer. We're also proud to be putting on an exhibition of our local... Also proud? Yeah, he's from here, the acid bath murderer. There you are, you ain't got one of them where you come from, have you, eh? Brighton might burn down their piers, but we've got a bloke who dissolves people in acid. Right, And the car parking policy is also something that is quite astounding. For listeners who probably don't know about the car parking policy, it's an imaginative scheme in the field of transport. It involves Sussex Council installing a series of parking meters in 2004 and then local people blowing them up. To quote an article in The Independent, the respectable-looking lady in the tea shop was an unlikely advocate of urban terrorism. She said, everyone I know is secretly pleased about the attacks. Good luck to them. This is amazing. When they have the next general election, David Dimbleby will be on there and he'll go, well, there's a bit of a surprise coming in from Lewes where there's a 40% swing to the Hamas militia. But any authority trying to put something unpopular into Lewes ought to realise, A, that you are stroppy, and B, that 90% of you have a PhD in explosives. That ought to be written on the town hall. But the thing is, of all the issues on which to raise a guerrilla army, only Lewes could pick parking meters. You'll probably get visits from people who hear about it but don't quite understand it, from a group called the Guatemalan People's Liberation Front or something. Brothers, sisters, we must learn the brutal but necessary lesson that only if we are prepared to lay down our lives can parking meter justice be necessarily won. We may not live to see the fruit of our victory, but our grandchildren understand that it is due to the sacrifice that we made that they enjoy the liberty of parking in the high street without paying maybe 30 pence as they pop into Greg's Baker for a muffin or perhaps a pasty. Now, I'll come to a sad story here, which is the plight of your beleaguered football club. which is a very sad tale. For those who don't know, Lewes FC was in the Sussex League, getting crowds of about 100. Then, the brilliant bit, the local property developer who owned the club put some money into it, getting promoted, a new stand was put in, the crowds went up to 1,800, and then on the last day of the season in 2008, was promoted to what used to be the Conference, the Blue Square Premier thing, whatever it is, just one division below the actual proper Football League, which is on the football pools, and the results get read out in grandstand and everything. But then, on the day that the club was promoted, all the money disappeared and the players got sold, and now you're almost bankrupt. That is a sad tale. I bet the transfer window for Lewes Football Club is when the chairman leans out of the pub window and goes, "Anyone fancy a game?" Now, I went to the match yesterday, the match with Wrexham, and it was a bit beleaguered, to be honest. I found myself getting more enthusiastic than anyone else, really, because when a home team is 1-0 down, then usually there's a sense of like, go on, because I was standing with the Lewes fans. I found myself going, go on, Lewes, and then I picked up a sort of sensation from everyone else, which is, don't bother, Mark. There's no point, mate.
Singing earlier on the terrace, we remember when we were good, and in fact they were very good. I mean, when a team is winning and they're enjoying their football, it's a joy to watch, and when they're struggling and they haven't won for countless matches, as Lewes haven't at the moment, then it's always going to be more painful. I reckon that at the end of the season we'll go down, the manager will go, and we'll probably do quite well again.
One of the best examples, though, of Lewes stroppiness in recent times, and the thing that I think people should be most proud of, is the Battle of the Lewes Arms, which is one of the most glorious episodes in the history of struggle, as far as I can see. Is Martin here at all? Oh, Martin, hello. Right. Can you just sort of describe to people who may not have heard about the battle exactly, first of all, what it was that caused such annoyance amongst the good people of the Lewes Arms?
Well, the Lewes Arms is called the Lewes Arms, you may have noticed, and therefore people look to it as the primary pub, or many people do, in the town. And it was bought some years ago by Green King, a brewer. And they successively removed the Harveys, which is the local beer that everybody prefers here, from all the other pubs. And the last one left was the Lewes Arms. And then they announced they were going to take it away from there, being Lewes beer drunk in that pub for 200 years, and we didn't like the thought of it being taken out. So we said, you take it out, we're not coming in anymore, and we'll picket the pub. And so they took it out, so we boycotted the pub and picketed it, and 133 days later, they put it back.
I just want to talk to John May, who's also a very important person in the campaign. One of the things that appears to me sort of caused great embarrassment to Green King was that there was this sort of extraordinary publicity that reached quite unfathomable proportions. Yeah. So where was it publicised?
Well, it was picked up by Reuters, so it appeared in the Jamaica Gleaner, which is the daily newspaper of Jamaica, the Toronto Star, the Melbourne Age, and so on. And then it was on the front, it was a 4-page feature in G2. There was a half-hour You and Yours programme on Radio 4.
Oh, that's what done it.
And finally, when they announced their quarterly financial reports in the Financial Times, there was only like a tiny piece of text about their financial reports, and there was a massive photo of people standing outside the Lewes Arms protesting.
Well, thanks very much to Martin Lieburn and John May. Mostly, of course, in Lewes, you're famous for burning stuff. And Bonfire Night here is not just famous for being one of the biggest, it's also the processions and the whole rigmarole that goes with it. There's between 5 and 7 bonfires. People keep telling me different stories, that maybe a couple are just sort of loose arsonists who think we can get away with anything that night. And it's also where the religious origins of the whole business of Bonfire Night are taken most seriously. One of the societies has a banner that says no popery and burns effigies of the Pope. So it does look as if it's been organised by Ian Paisley at one point. The no popery banner goes back to events that happened here the 1550s. The Catholic Church at this point dominated Europe. All communication with God was supposed to be through the priest. The Bible was only available in Latin so that no commoner could read it. And I find this fascinating about the Church, that throughout history, the people most insistent that the Bible should not make any sense to the majority of the population have been the heads of the Church. And it's like, again, now, the Bible is in the most unreadable language of any book there is. If they want it to be accessible to a young audience, they should have a version that goes, and God said, mankind, you is disrespecting me blood, innit? It's going to rain on you for like 40 days and 40 nights, you get me? It's going to be proper mush up God like said that you is a waste mankind blood, innit? Henry VIII then brought about the Reformation, which meant taking the English Church out of the control of the Vatican, as we know, and out of the control of the Pope. But then, after Henry died, when Mary became the Queen, she wanted to make England Catholic again and became so enthusiastic that she decided to burn Protestants, 1/3 of which were from Sussex, and the biggest concentration of these fires took place in Lewes. For example, Derek Carver, a brewer from Brighton, was arrested for saying prayers in English. So he confessed. He was told not to do it again, but he carried on. So at his second trial, he said to the prosecutor, in the spirit of compromise, "Your doctrine is poison and sorcery. If Christ were here, you would put him to a worse death than he was put to before. You say that you can make a god. Well, you can make a pudding as well." What a magnificent combination of defiance and surrealism. Like if Martin Luther King had said, "I have a dream of black and white children playing together with zebras made of semolina." So poor Derek was burnt at the stake at the Star Inn, which is now where the town hall is. And over the next 2 years, there were 16 other executions up there for crimes such as refusing to attend mass conducted in Latin or refusing to believe that a priest had the power to absolve your sins. There were huge crowds, apparently, at these burn-ins. But instead of the effect being to terrify people, of course, it just made them quietly furious. And then in Victorian times, the Bonfire Boys were set up. This group, the Bonfire Boys, who made the fires bigger every year and got in fights with the police. Can you believe people in Lewes getting in fights with the police? I just want to talk to Peter Messer at this point, who, apart from being a local artist, is also very prominent in the Commercial Square Bonfire Society. Hiya, Peter. So, with the effigies of the Pope, every few years when a Pope dies, that means someone's got to go, oh, well, look at the work I've got to do now.
It's not the current Pope. It's the Pope that was around at the time when the martyrs were burnt in the middle of the town.
What happens in the evening then? Because these are huge things.
Well, we have the torchlit processions through the streets, big fiery pieces, and then everybody goes back to their own bonfire sites, huge, sort of mega haystack-sized bonfires, loads of fireworks going up. The clergy get up, which is the clergy are this sort of notional clergy who get up onto a rostrum made out of scaffold poles. And they try and harangue the crowd who throw fireworks at them in the most dangerous way possible. And people are gagging to be in the clergy, apparently.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Peter, for that marvellous description of your... this peculiar procession. The whole thing does almost seem to be designed to be as a deliberate affront to the world of health and safety. There's probably one society that goes, to add to the gaiety, we set a leopard loose among the crowd. It does almost seem like you're deliberately trying to break the world record for being most unpolitically correct on as many different grounds as once. Next year at the planning committee, the secretary will say, one welcome addition of this year's parade is that each society will take a creature from an endangered species and torture it. Commercial Square Society are going to recite the works of Shakespeare in a pub using smoke signals. Let's see what these asthmatics think of that. In 2008, in an act of wonderfully confident Lewes stroppiness, you issued your own currency. Just as most of Europe is trying to merge its currencies, you come up with one that won't even be accepted in Haywards Heath. The face on the Lewes currency is Tom Paine, with his line, "We have the power to build the world anew." So do people use this currency? The idea of this then was that it would be accepted into local shops, but then you don't know what's going to happen in the current climate. It might end up as the strongest currency there is. On the radio they're going, "Now, quick look at the financial markets." Well, amidst the general gloom, there is encouraging news for the Lewis pound, which rose against all major currencies. This morning is up 15% against the yen, now worth £4.50 a pound sterling. Some speculators are still being put off by the fact it can only be spent in Penny's boutique, Percy's fish will take his shop and Bill the organic grocers. I bet the whole town gets called in to see the government every few weeks. And the government goes, "Always the same faces, isn't it, Lewis?" What? "Yes, sir." "Now, what have you done?" "Come on, out of it, made own pound, sir." "Why can't you be like Eastbourne, Lewis? They don't make their own pound, nor does Seaford, nor does Hurstpierpoint." "What about Hastings, sir?" "You know full well, Lewis, Hastings was expelled long ago." There's a sense of dissent, I think, here that seems to have run through history, and it just keeps popping up. It might be that it's passed from one generation to the next, so the heretics that stood up to authority created an atmosphere of defiance that we won't be druv or told what to do. 450 years later, you're boycotting pubs and chucking rook scarers at idiots dressed as cardinals and doing things that are a sort of dissent. Or there is another explanation of Lewis' stroppiness, which is that Tom Paine was telling the truth about every woman falling for his charms, and there you are, you're all descended from him, and Green King had no idea what they were taking on. But seeing as you seem to sort of train one resident to the point that he was able to go away and write the end to the first black president of America's inauguration speech, I think your next campaign should be for Obama to come back and do a speech here. I reckon you could see him outside the White Hart going, "The times we live in are uncertain, but it is in those times that we must remember the values that remain certain, that we, the people of Lewes, will not be druv." Together, if we stand strong, whether black or white, gay or straight, Lewesian or DFL, we will allow no intruder to tamper with our beer, to shackle us with our parking meters, to restrict the intensity of our bonfires. Can we remain true to the ideals and courage of the heretics at the stake, the pickets at the pub, the madman putting gunpowder in council property to build a world anew, Lewis? Yes, we can.
Mark Still's in Town was written and performed by Mark Still. The producer was Julia Mackenzie.